Good evening, everybody. If you'd like, you can go ahead and open your Bibles up to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. Last time, we're going to have time to review the 10 plagues. So, in the way of memory work, what's the first one?
Water to blood.
Water to blood. Second. What? I got to get going here. Frogs. Next. Lice. Flies. Cattle. Boils. Hail. Locusts. And darkness. All right. So that brings us to the ones that we've covered now. What is the one that's coming? Death of the firstborn. Who knows that it's coming? Everybody knows that it's coming. And so we kind of made this point. What would you do after 9 plagues and you know the next one is death of the firstborn? What would you do if you were Pharaoh?
I don't know if I was Pharaoh, but I know if I was one of them Egyptians, if I had the money, I'd get out of Egypt.
That's right. Or what else could you do? I would be finding me an Israelite family that I could stay with for the night. I do believe that I would do that. So some instruction has been given about what the Israelites could do. And they are to take a lamb. Any qualifications on this lamb? That's right. Several qualifications for this lamb and how this lamb is to be prepared, when it's to be taken, what's to be done with it, how it's to be cooked, all of that. How careful would you be with those instructions? I would be because what's at stake here? That's right. Or the life of my son or whatever. So, want to be very, very careful with that. So, I think we made it in our... anything else you want to say in the way of review? Because I think we're about to get some review on some of the things regarding the instruction there.
Some of it, but yeah. He gives them the instructions on the Passover there. But we'll see that when they do it, they carry it out. Yeah,
so some instruction has been given, but now Moses says in verse 21 of chapter 12, Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families and kill the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and strike the lintels and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning, for the Lord will pass through and strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your house to strike you." All right, so we'll pause right there. So, those that have faith are doing this. They're practicing this. And Moses tells them exactly what's going to happen. The destroyer, the plague is coming through, but if you follow this instruction, the Lord will see that and He will pass over and not destroy you in your house. Got anything you want to add, or you want to continue on there?
Did the Lord have to have this blood thing to make sure He didn't make any errors or
Nope.
No, obviously not, right? What was the purpose of that?
Well, it was actually a foreshadowing of Christ's blood on the cross. But it was mainly just like when He told Noah to build the ark. He gave him specific instructions. And just like He gave the children of Israel specific instructions. But they got to follow them to the T if the people don't want God to bring the plague to them.
Somebody else have something?
I said to show the faith.
Yeah, He gave them something to do. Even though He didn't have to have them do that, He gave them something for them to carry out and do to show their faith, an opportunity to show their faith. Yeah, so that was the only point extra I had too.
You want to jump in and carry on?
24, right?
Yes.
"And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as He promised, that you shall keep this service." So you're going to do this, you're going to carry this out in the future. "And that shall be when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?' That you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when He struck the Egyptians and delivered our households.' So the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then the children of Israel went away and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did.
Question. I've never asked this before. I know that the Passover was after this, but when the children of Israel, after they got out of Egypt and later on, every time it comes to Passover, when they killed the perfect lamb, did they still have to do the lintel and the post on their houses at each Passover?
That's a great question. And I don't know of any information. I've wondered that before too. We have some records, Jewish records, of how the Passover was kept at different times. I don't know that any mention this. By the time we get to Christ, there's a number of things that are quite different from what we read here. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer. I don't know that the text tells us anything different.
It just struck me when he said that they were to continue this afterwards. So I thought, I've never asked this question.
I don't know. I don't know if it was. I assumed that it would be. I don't know. I had not seen anything in the text that would make me think otherwise. So based upon what I see here, I think if I was a Jew, I would have done it because I think that's what it says.
Going along with, there were other feasts that they kept and other sacrifices that they offered, and maybe, parents were to teach their children about all of them, but this one, if they did do that, this one would be a lot different, right? Imagine being a kid and your parents, if they did put blood on the, carrying that out. Why are we doing that? Why are we putting blood all over the house, And it would give them a chance to explain it, and teach it to them. But they did it. It says they did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So it's happened. We started out. He said, "Hey, get your lamb ready." He had explained it to them, get it ready. All right, go through and do it. They all did it.
Any other thoughts through verse 28?
It also showed the Egyptians when they put the blood there. It was an example of them that the Jews they had to do this. And then I know that some of them would probably want to go with it when they came.
Yes. I think that's right. I do think we're going to see some of that. Now, some of that's assumption, but really, it doesn't take much imagination to figure out that the Egyptians at this point, we've already seen that they highly respect Moses. We see that God's given them, the Israelites, favor in their sight and so forth. So it would not surprise me that, yes, they are noting this, paying attention to this, and will be drawn to the Israelites, I think, as it goes on. Anything else? All right, so the children of Israel do it just as God commanded Moses. Verse 29, and it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all of the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. So Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all of his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one that was dead. I just wonder how this played out. First of all, I don't know how they died, whether they died in agony or whether they died silently in their sleep. But at midnight, Pharaoh rises up. Did he rise up because someone came and said, this is terrible. We're losing lives here. Or did he rise up to check to see if what Moses said had come to pass? If that was the case, what he found is, yes, exactly as Moses said, it took place. And not a house in Israel was left unaffected by this. It was devastating. I'm sorry, thank you. In Egypt. Yes, in Egypt. Devastating what has taken place here. And so, at this point, anything you want to say about that? Because anybody.
And all the plagues up until, some may have died when the hail told them to get out of the way of the hail. And if you did, maybe you died. But up until now, there's been a lot of discomforts and things. But now lots of people are dying in this one.
Yeah. All right, so verse 29, or verse 31 rather. Then he called Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. How is this different than the other times he said to go? No conditions here. Yeah, get out, go. And that's exactly what God said would happen. This last plague, he would drive you out. In other words, he didn't want you to stay anymore. It is interesting that he says, and bless me also. He recognizes, what was his original question?
Who's the Lord?
Who is the Lord? Now what's he wanting from the Lord? A blessing from the Lord. Isn't that interesting? So he starts off, who is Jehovah that I should listen to him? Now he's asking for a blessing from Jehovah. And he's saying, go. And that's exactly what God said would happen through all of this. And so, remember the last, with the last plague, he said, if you ever see my face again, you will surely die. And what did Moses say? I will not see your face again. So he calls for him here, but apparently, I assume, putting these together, that he sends word to him rather than Moses actually coming to him and seeing him, just based upon that earlier exchange.
So we've already seen what's going to happen in verse 33, but it says the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste. For they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough, and where I was referring to in 33, they had plundered them already, right? They'd gone to them, and the Egyptians had already given them all their stuff, hoping to, for them to leave. But at 34 says, so the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their clothes on their shoulders. Now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and articles of clothing, as I was mentioning earlier. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So they were able to plunder the greatest nation on the earth without ever having to fight a single battle. Literally, they gave them their stuff, surrendered all their stuff to them in the hopes that they would leave. They surrendered. They said, "Hey, we're defeated. You and your God take all these things, and please don't stay here because it says we shall all be dead." So just as it was said earlier, they left with great riches. Imagine that. Imagine having been a slave your whole life, and now you've got more riches than you can even haul, out of here. You got the issue of trying to pack all this stuff up and carry it. Just imagine how all the other things going on that would amaze you, but this on top of it, where all of a sudden you're rich on top of being able to see everything that's been going on and being spared from all this.
Let me finish this section, and then I want to come back and make a point about this. So in verse 37, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. We'll talk about that in a second. But how many of them? What's the count here? Yeah, 600,000 men on foot. Now, this would be the men of fighting age. So how many would that be? If we say, okay, that's the men of fighting age, and we would assume there'd be at least that many women, and then little ones. So what are we looking at here? We got 600,000 here. 1.5 million. Yeah, there you yeah. All right. So we may be up to 1.5 million, 2 million. Some have even estimated it to be as high as 3 million. 3 million people, is that a lot of people? It is. That's right. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And so, well, hold on. Let's read a little bit. And then verse 38, I think this goes back to what Alan was saying a second ago. A mixed multitude went up with them, and flocks and herds and a great deal of livestock. A mixed multitude. What is this? Well, it could be that these are other people who were enslaved to Egypt, using this as an opportunity to go as well. It's also very possible that these are Egyptians that have defected over, so to speak. And, we started off by talking about what would you do if you were an Egyptian for this last plague. I'd find an Israelite to stay with, and I think I'd leave with them because I would like to have a God like Jehovah. And I've seen his power. I've seen what he could do. And so there's a mixed multitude that goes up with them. Let's read a little bit further here. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough, which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out in haste and they couldn't wait. And so that's what they ate the first few days they were on the go here. In verse 40 says, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years, and it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on the very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out of the land of Egypt. It is a night of solemn observance to the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord, a solemn observance for all the children of Israel throughout their generation. Now, you remember Moses is writing this, and he's writing this to the children of Israel, obviously, after these events. And he's reminding them that what the Passover is it's a night of solemn remembrance of what God did on that night when he led them out. So that's the instruction here. But I want you to notice some of the elements that's under consideration here. So we've noticed that they came out with great riches, that they were driven out, that God has decimated the land of Egypt at this point with the plagues. You notice that there are at least 600,000 men of fighting age, possibly 2 million to 3 million, and others that are coming out. How long had they been in the land? 430 years. Now, hold your place there, and I want you to go back, all the way back into Genesis, back to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis 15. In Genesis 15, how many children does Abraham have in Genesis 15? Zero children. But God is promising him children. And he says that you will have descendants from your own body. He has none at this point. But he says you will have descendants from your own body, and God's going to make a covenant with him. Now, I want you to notice that as this covenant is being made, let's read verses 13 through 16. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants, he doesn't have any descendants yet, but know certainly your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years, and also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with what? Great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Okay, the reason I want to point this out, and by the way, God goes on to make this covenant with him, and he's going to have an heir, and that heir is going to be who? Isaac. And then Isaac is going to have Jacob. Jacob is going to have 12 sons. When they go down into Egypt, how many people were there? 75. Now they're coming up 1.5 million to 3 million out of that. Do you realize that God had made this promise a long time before it happened? I mean, they've been in the land for 430 years, and the promise was made before they went into the land. Here's the lesson that I want us to really start keeping track of. When God makes a promise, what happens? He keeps it. Is it always immediate? Does the passing of time, maybe hundreds of years, change it? No. So what does that do for us? When we look back and we say, woo, God made a promise, and he made a promise that he would have a descendant, that his descendants would multiply, that his descendants would become a great nation, that they would be slaves and serve a foreign nation, come out after the fourth generation with great possessions, and that happened exactly the way that God said. What does that do for us? It builds our faith that when God makes us promises, even if it is hundreds or thousands of years before that happens, we have confidence that it will happen, because God is building a track record here of being honest, of being trustworthy. And we need to know that. So we talked about in drill class, without faith it is impossible to please Him. For those who come to God must believe that He is and that He is the rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. We're learning that lesson about faith as we go through this. All right. What do you got?
This all happened that night. He called for him at night and says this is a night of solemn observance, so they were to eat this with their clothes on, with their, their ready to go clothes on, and it happens that night. So a night of solemn, it was a night that Israel or Egypt, either one, whatever.
That's right. Very good. Any other thoughts through chapter? Yeah, okay, yes, thank you. Through verse 42. I'm on the wrong page. Anything? All right, I'll let you take the next section.
All right, so to finish up chapter 12, this event here is obviously one that the Lord wants them to remember and to keep in the future. And he finishes up this chapter with just some regulations here, rules for this Passover going forward. So in 43, it says, And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat it, but every man's servant who is bought for money, when you have circumcised him, then he may eat it. A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat it. In one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of its bones. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. When a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as a native of the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat it. One law shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you. Thus all the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. And it came to pass on that very same day that the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their armies. So he gives them some future rules. We're going to keep this up, and this is not for everybody. This is not just a big party that you can invite anybody to and anybody can partake of. There were specific rules. If someone was a hired servant or a slave or something that you had, they had to be circumcised and become one of you before they could carry out. If a stranger dwells among you and wants to keep it, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come and keep it. So it was one rule for the native, for everyone, for the native of the land and for the stranger among them.
That was in keeping with the covenant that God made with Abraham.
Yes, that's right. So the circumcision was linked to the covenant. And now Moses is linking this memorial feast to the covenant, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because what does Jesus use as the springboard for the memorial feast for us? The Passover. And what does he link it to? This cup is the new covenant in my blood. And so I think that is interesting that here the Passover is linked to the covenant with Israel. Jesus would use the Passover as the springboard for him setting up a memorial that would be connected with our covenant with him. All right, so verse 50, thus all the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. By the way, when you see that phrase, they did it just the way the Lord said, or they did it as the Lord commanded. What does that mean? What is going to be connected with that when they do that? Good things or bad things? Good things. So that's another pattern that we're seeing. Our faith is being built that, hey, when we do it just the way the Lord commands, things go well. When we don't, things don't go well with that. So it came to pass on the very same night that the Lord brought out the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their armies. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Sanctify me all of the firstborn, whoever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both man and animal, it is mine. Why are there firstborn among the children of Israel, man and beast? Because God spared them. God spared them. The Egyptians couldn't do this, could they? They didn't have any firstborn left. what Moses says to the children of Israel is, I want you to set apart all of the ones that I spared. They are mine. They are mine. I spared them. They belong to me. So we'll talk about more how they do that as we get a little bit later on in this chapter. Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand of the Lord, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. So what's the connection between the no leavened bread and remember? Yeah. So when they ate leavened bread, I get the idea that they didn't normally eat unleavened bread.
Yeah, it seems odd. Seems like it was something that would be odd to them.
Yes. But they had to eat unleavened bread on this occasion because why? They had to leave. It didn't have time to rise. So from... It was.
Kill the lamb.
Yes.
Unleavened.
That's right. That's right.
So they already had a bunch of it ready when this was over, so they just took what they had with them as they left.
So what this will, from this point on, be linked to is that day when by God's strength He brought us out and delivered us. So from this point on, unleavened bread would be eaten, and it would be eaten as a reminder of what God did on that occasion. So on this day, you're going out in the month of Abib, which would be their first month, because remember, God said this will start a new calendar for you. This is a new beginning for you. It shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, which He swore to your fathers to give to you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast unto the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leavened bread be seen among those in all of your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. It shall be a sign to you on your hand as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. So there's several important things here, I think. This is going to be a memorial. You're going to remember this day. You need to remember who the Lord is. Up to this point in our Bible study, this would have to be one of the top 3 events where God reveals who He is and how powerful He is. Creation would have to rank up there. But this one, who is Jehovah that I should listen to Him? The deliverance out of Egypt is a strong answer of who Jehovah is. He is my Savior. He is my deliverer. So every year we do this to remember how He brought us out. And we do this, we eat this unleavened bread, remembering that we had to leave in such haste because He made it so that here we were captive slaves, and then all at once we're free. And so we keep this. So when your children, tell your sons in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. It is a memorial for it. So every year the children of Israel keep the Passover, keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread as a memorial to remember what God did. The significance of this. Steve was asking about, do they put the blood up on the doorpost and the lintel? I don't see any passage, and I may be overlooking something, so if y'all find something, please let me know. I don't see any passage that God said, don't do this. Them doing this year after year, as Lucas was talking about, and they're questioning, well, what's going on here? What's the significance of this? Was pointing to something. For the next 1,500 years, it's pointing to something. What's it pointing to?
Well, when Christ actually had the Passover with the apostles, and they will remember this part of it, then Christ actually took the unleavened bread and said, this is my body. And then He took the fruit of the vine and said, this is the blood for the remission of sins. Y'all do and remembrance of me. And later on that He would do it when He comes again.
So, Jesus is the real Passover. And so this built-in memorial through 1,500 years, why did God select Abraham and the children of Israel to begin with? To bring forth the seed of woman who would defeat Satan. Through your seed, all nations will be blessed. So for 1,500 years, His seed is keeping this memorial feast. And when it comes to Jesus, Jesus takes it that last time and He says, I'll no longer eat this until it is fulfilled in the kingdom. Till I eat it anew with you in the kingdom. Until it is accomplished. So what this signified, what this was showing, will take place. And real deliverance will be offered by the blood of the Lamb of God, which comes to take away the sins of the world. So this memorial was set in place for them to remember that, looking forward. They didn't know it, but they were looking forward to when that would take place. We partake of memorial now, looking back to what took place, because that one event was central to all of man's history, before and after,
And it also looks to the future.
until He comes again.
At the Passover, the destroyer, the death angel, or whatever, they come through and slaughtered all the firstborn. The blood on the post, and the unleavened bread, and the lamb, He spared. Same thing today, if you obey Christ's teachings and are baptized and you do God's commandment and Christ's teachings, He'll spare us if we're still alive and we done died from natural causes or whatever. When He comes again, if you've been fulfilling His commandments, the death angel will spare you when He brings you to me, and all the other ones He's going to destroy.
The day of judgment, same thing, separation, it will be spared. Very good. The last point that I'll make on this is just simply that, when they ate the Passover, they remembered the Lord is our Savior and our deliverer. When we eat the Lord's Supper, we remember the same thing. Jesus is our Savior and our deliverer.
Strong hand of the Lord.
Yes.
That idea continues through the New Testament. It just shows His power.
Yeah.
He's able
That's right.
to deliver us.
Amanda was saying that phrase, the strong hand of the Lord, continues on through the New Testament. That theme, He is able to deliver us, is still there, present in the New Testament. You got anything you want to add to anything through verse
No, I don't have
10? Anybody else have anything? Yes, sir.
It's just maybe me. I felt like it was just that one night, blood on the lintel.
Yeah.
They're not going to be living in houses.
Well, you're right. That's a good point. That you may be right about that. I don't know. I don't know. But that's a good point. I don't know how you maybe paint it on your tent door. I don't know. But that's a good point to bring up. Anybody got anything else? All right. We'll continue on.
All right, so we have verse 11 here. He's mentioned so many times about how you're going to carry this on and you're going to keep this up, and it's going to help you remember what happened here. And you're going to teach your kids about it. And we have another situation like that. Another thing they're going to do. My Bible has a little title put in there. It says the law of the firstborn, but it says in verse 11, and it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, and it's mentioned when you get to the land, it mentioned that up in verse 5 there. When you get to the land of the Canaanites, as He swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb. That is, every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey, you shall redeem it with a lamb. And if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons, you shall redeem. So another way that they're going to remember this and remember what has happened here, the reason that they have firstborn to even consider this with is in the future, when you have something that opens the firstborn of a calf or something, a lamb or whatever, you have to kill it. It belongs to the Lord. If it's an animal, I mentioned like a donkey or something that maybe you wouldn't normally kill, you might want to keep, you have to substitute a lamb for it. When a woman has a firstborn child, it has to be redeemed with a lamb. In verse 14, it says, "So it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, What is this? That you shall say to him, By strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of the man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb. But all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. For by the strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt." So this is another way that this night is not going to be forgotten. What the Lord has done, the strength of the Lord is not going to be forgotten. Would this be inconvenient? Yes, it was something else they had to do. You raise a heifer up and her first calf, you kill it. It's the Lord's. You have to wait another year till she has another calf. You had to sacrifice a lamb every time something was born that you didn't want to kill. You had to sacrifice a different animal to redeem it, all because the Lord wanted them to remember the night that their firstborn were spared. So from there on, the firstborn of everything belonged to him.
And this memory of not only that event, but it was also a memory of the covenant and law that they had. If you go back to chapter 13 in verse 8, and you shall tell your sons in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. It shall be a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. In other words, that you can remember the law that was given to you as well. So it was more than just remembering an event. It was remembering the covenant and the instruction that was given to them, the law that was given to them also.
And also, I think what he's commanded them to do is to put their trust in God. And also, the fear part of it is, if you don't do this, just remember what happened to all the Egyptians in Egypt that were all the firstborn that died. So this is very little required of you, even though it's a loss of an animal or whatever for your son of the firstborn. But it's to put the reverence and the sanction of God's authority over.
Yeah.
It mentions a sign on your hand and something that you can't forget or overlook.
Yes.
It's right in front of your face, or it's like right on your hand, something that he's making it where they're going to remember this.
Yeah, so if you go to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall in Jerusalem today, you'll see a bunch of Orthodox Jews that have the phylacteries and the prayer bands on their arm, because in Deuteronomy it talks about that these commandments that I give you today shall be as frontlets between your eyes and on your hand. And so they take that literally, and they strap a little box to their forehead that have little scriptures in them and so forth. But you kind of get the idea of what that phrase means from right here. It's the idea that this is I want this to constantly be before you. I don't want you to forget this. And therefore, I want you to keep this memorial. I want you to do this so that you'll constantly remember this. That's what that phrase means. And so we see that here, that keep that before you so that you can see it. All right, anybody got anything? So, verse 17, it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go. Oh, I want to make one other point here. I'm sorry, backing up. And this is a side point, but we've talked about this several times because it is a very confusing. Who hardened Pharaoh's heart? Was it Pharaoh or was it God? What's the answer? Both. All right. So, but look at verse 15. It came to pass when Pharaoh was Stubborn. Who was given credit for that? Pharaoh was. And so, yes, God hardened Pharaoh's heart because he was stubborn, and therefore everything that God did, he wanted to push against and resist. Okay, back to verse 17. When Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. Where are they going? They're going to the promised land. They're going up here to the promised land. They're down here in Egypt. Well, the way to go would be right, but there's a major trade route called the Way of the Sea that comes right up, goes right through Gaza, which is a territory of the Philistines, and then they could go up and possess the land. But God didn't lead them that way, even though that would have been very near. What was the reason why God didn't lead them that way? That's right. The people are, as they come into the land, they're going to encounter the Philistines. They're going to have to fight against the Philistines. You know anything about the Philistines? Yeah. And so God says, I don't think you're ready for that yet. They're not.
They're not. They're not. They don't have an army here anymore.
No truer statement has been made. They were not.
I think there was another main reason. I mean, when God sent Moses and Abram to go to Pharaoh, was to come and worship him. And Moses was close to Mount Ararat when he had the burning bush, and he's going back to the same place.
So that promise has to be fulfilled. That's right. You will come to this mountain and worship. Very good. But we're given an additional reason here in that they're not ready yet for that. There's more faith building that needs to take place. Unfortunately, it's going to take about 40 years to build that faith. I don't think that God was hoping it would take that long, but it ends up taking that long. So he doesn't lead them the way of the Philistines, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land. So he's going to lead them down. We don't know the route exactly. We do know that they come from Ramses down to Succoth, and then they're going to go down somewhere, and at some point they're going to cross the Red Sea. This is the traditional site where they think the crossing of the Red Sea may have taken place. We don't know that for sure. We don't know exactly where it was at. But he leads them down. But look at verse 19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under a solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. You remember at the end of Genesis, Joseph saying that? Joseph wasn't, apparently they weren't allowed to take Joseph and bury him like they did Jacob. But he says, the Lord's going to visit you. He's going to rescue you from here. And when he does, you make sure to take my bones. And Moses remembers that. He keeps that vow that was made by the children of Israel to do so.
Let me finish up.
Sure.
So they took their journey from Succoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. Now again, 2 or 3 million people, right? So this is imagine trying to travel that many people, how to tell people where we're going. I mean, if they all tried to stand together, how much space would that many people take up? It would be a major confusion of how do we get this many people all going the same direction. So it says, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So this is just a way that God fixes that situation. A pillar of cloud, no matter if you were 2 miles away from people, the other 3, I don't know how much space they would have taken up if they tried to travel on a line, or if they would have just been, but they all knew we got to follow that cloud, right? We may come through over here and you may come right here, but we're all following that pillar of cloud, and it kept them on the right path. And by night, to provide light, it was a pillar of fire. So they have escaped, and he's providing guidance to them through this miraculous means.
But he's given them the strength by hauling all of this, even though they had some animals, to actually work day and night to lead and have the strength to do it.
We will pick up there next time. Remember what's happening. They need time to build their faith. We're about to get a major faith building lesson in our next class. Still is for us today. Thank you for your good attention. Appreciate your comment. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.